What if the secret to success wasn't just talent or hard work, but unshakable confidence? Welcome to Grasp Confidence, the podcast where visionary thought leaders, speakers, and entrepreneurs unlock the mindset and strategies for lasting success. I'm your host, Tara LaFon Gooch, CEO, two-time best-selling author, and international TEDx speaker, and I can't wait to help you step into the most powerful version of yourself. Let's dive in. Pat has one of the greatest minds in the personal and professional growth industry. When Pat asks me anything, the answer is always yes. Brian Tracy. When it comes to change, Pat really knows his stuff. The man is a genius. Bob Proctor. That's just a glimpse of how today's guest is viewed by some of the biggest names in personal development. Pat Slattery left school at 14 years old, started working at 15, and went on to build businesses generating over 25 million euro in sales. He has delivered 3,000 plus keynote speeches and is a mentor to thousands of entrepreneurs around the world. Today on Grasp Confidence Podcast, we're diving into the mindset, discipline, and work ethic that turns ordinary beginnings into extraordinary success. Pat, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Tara. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we had the pleasure of being introduced by our mutual friend Daniel Wood and our other mutual friend Mark Victor Hansen, who both spoke so highly of you and your work. And what a story. As I read your bio, it's almost hard to believe leaving school at 14 and going on to be a tremendous success. Obviously, you're from Ireland, but you are currently living in Spain. You're living the dream, my friend. I would love to hear about your origin and how you got started in all of this.
If I go right back, Tara, to, I guess, my early life, I grew up in a 3-bedroom council house in Limerick in Ireland. I come from a big family, but if my dad was alive today, he would be 103 years old. And at 42 years old, he broke his back in a workplace accident. And back then, there was no compensation claims or anything like that. Or if there was, my family didn't know about that, right? So we were raised on a pension of £70 a week, which my dad was given from the state. So you can imagine that there wasn't a lot going on in our family in terms of treats or there was nothing special in terms of we had nothing extra. We just kind of get by with what we had. I mean, by the way, I think it's very important to point out I had a very happy childhood, even though I was poor. I don't think I knew I was poor, and some people in my neighborhood were poorer than us. So this was a normal life. This is how we grew up, and we had no expectations. So at 14 years old, I got a job in a hotel. And when I got that job, I remember getting my first paycheck. It was £35 of a paycheck. And I remember taking that money home, and I split my paycheck with my mum. And I sensed something. And that extra income was making a huge difference in my family's life. And I just thought, I can't lose this job. This was my most prized possession. This was the one thing I had. And by the way, in the environment where I grew up, because of where we grew up, there came a lot of other issues with that neighborhood. So coming from that neighborhood, it was very difficult to get a job. So over 80% of the people in my neighborhood were unemployed. So I had already achieved what more than 80% of the people in my immediate community couldn't achieve or hadn't achieved just yet. So when I gave that paycheck to my mom, I kind of realized, you know what? I can't lose this job. This was so important to me. And I had to make a decision because I had a lot of fear, right? Because when we grow up in an area like that, and you guys will hear this and your listeners might resonate with this, and we might talk a little bit about this also. We hear the old stories, well, you're too young, or you come from the wrong side of town, or you have no education, or you're too old, or you have no money. And all of these reasons why people can't do anything. You see, I had heard all of this stuff in my past, in my youth as well. So I had a fear in this hotel that people might discover where I'm from, or they might discover my true age, because nobody actually asked me my age when they gave me the job. Right? And I was quite big for my age, so people assumed I was older, and I didn't tell a lie, but I wasn't forthcoming with the truth, right? And but I said, you know what's going to happen here for me is I'm going to show up every single day, and I'm going to be the best I can be. I'm going to make myself irreplaceable. Now, there were guys in the same job as me in that hotel who were certainly better at the job because I had a lot more experience. But that didn't phase me because in my own mind, I said, there can't be a better me than me. And if I can show up and give 100% of me, then that's what's going to make the difference. So when the summer period was over, the hotel manager offered me to stay on permanently. So I got to leave school, which was another win for me back then, right? And of course, my parents were happy because remembering again that most people in my environment, they didn't move into employment even. So I had achieved more. Now I was bringing home an income, which at the time truly was the dream. That was it. I never envisaged that I'd actually grow a company or build a company or handle millions of euros. That wasn't even part of the plan back then. But I showed up every single day. And I think that's what was really important. And as a result of this, by showing up at 15 years old, I became a bouncer in nightclubs, right? And imagine, I'm running these nightclubs and the security in these nightclubs. I'm still too young to get in, so that was fun. and and from there, I was approached by a lot of hotel managers or nightclub managers or owners asking me to come working for them because of the attitude that I took every time I went to work. And as a result of that, the opportunity started to come to me. Now, now in hindsight, what I really know was going on here, and I think it's important for people who are looking to start in business or even in life, it doesn't matter, is when you bring value to your life, then the higher value opportunities find you. And I read this in the Celestine Prophecy many years ago, and I remember saying that that's exactly it. Because once you start bringing value, which means as a human being, by the way, you bring value to other people and you keep doing this consistently, then the higher value opportunities will find you. And more people are going to come to you and say, hey, Tara, take my money, right? They're going to want to pay you for your services. They're going to want to hire you because they want to hire the best or what they perceive to be the best for them. And usually, high value people look for high value people. Does that make sense? And
It
that's
does.
kind of where the journey began back in my youth.
Wow. I love what you said there. And, it's such a powerful story because so many people think they need something else in order to get success, in order to get ahead in life. I've got to get that degree. I got to get that credential. I didn't come from the right family. Nobody's going to take me seriously. And, for a long time, I was stuck in my own head about that as well, right? I didn't come from a family that had, a lot of money. We were very poor growing up. And it's very much a mindset of understanding that you don't have to have all of the things in order that other people necessarily have in order to get ahead. We already have the innate tools within us to do great work in whatever capacity that means. But the more value you bring to others, the more value you get in return. And that's really a powerful principle that I think people don't talk about anymore. They talk about get rich quick. They talk about instant gratification, instant success, right? That's what we see so much online. But it's really not about that. It's about the value you bring, and then the value you bring to others really comes back to you in the end. Why is that, Pat? Why is that a thing?
Well, I guess we talk about people being educated, right? And there's a
Right.
different way of education. And when I talk about education, I talk about education through experience. And ironically, the question you're asking me now with that testimonial that you read from Bob Proctor came at one of our seminars from the conversation we're having, almost this exact conversation that we're having here, Tara. And when I look back in life and I start thinking about all of these different things that people say and how society creates an expectation and how most people buy into society's expectation of them. So when we hear things like, I'm too young, I'm too old, I have no money, I come from the wrong side of town, I have no education. Now, and when I speak at my seminars, I often share this and I ask people, what are they? And people go, well, these are just excuses that we use. But the reality is they're not. These are programs. And these are programs that people are conditioned to believe to be true about them. And this is what conditions them not to step forward and to take action. And the one thing I'm grateful for is nobody ever taught me that. I was always encouraged. I was surrounded by some great people. And I was always encouraged just to go out there and be the best you can be. And and like you said, everybody right now is looking for that instant gratification, the fast win, the quick win, and it's been sold everywhere. Everybody's selling this, right? But the reality is, you got to go through a process, and you have to understand the process. And the first thing is, you have to move beyond thinking the way other people think, and you have to be able to change that programming. And Bob Proctor was famous for this, for changing the paradigms, right, and changing the programming that's conditioning you to behave a certain way. So for me, somebody often asks me about my successes, and somebody asked me, have you ever failed? Well, actually, yes, but I never knew I was failing. Nobody ever taught me about failure, and I believe that was the difference. Right? When I grew up, every single day I was surviving. I showed up every day. And the moment I woke up in the morning, me and my siblings and the people in my neighborhood, it was all about survival. So when I was going through the challenges that you would go through in business and trying to build a business or grow and so forth, it was just a normal day for me. I was just surviving. Yet, if I was taught about failure, I may have stopped. It's quite likely I would have stopped because I would have recognized failure instead of showing up and going from surviving to thriving. And I think that's the difference, and that's where we got to get people to see and to understand that you can do and have anything despite your circumstances, as long as you don't buy into that conditioning and that programming that society creates.
Yes. And we've all heard it. You're a failure, right? We've either heard it from people saying it to us, you've really failed at that, or you're a failure, or that person's a failure. Failing does not make you a failure. And it's such a poisonous thing to say to somebody, and people can really internalize it, and it becomes that kind of like you're saying, a program to where that person almost can give up on life. And it's really such a shame to see because we all have so much potential within us. And it's these programs, I really stress it to my coaching clients as well, that people have programs they're not even aware of. And that's not easy to overcome. So, how do you, I guess, start to become aware of programs that you have? Because I do believe that in order for us to overcome them, we first have to notice that they're there. So how would you say we can overcome these programs that we have and identify them?
Question everything, right? Think
Question
like a child.
everything. Yes,
Question
I love that.
everything.
Yes.
If you tell a child, if a child asks you, I remember having one school teacher who was magnificent, and he shared this with us in school. And he told us a story of a man on the train. And he said there was a lady there with her child, and the child was getting boisterous and jumping around, and the lady was getting a bit agitated because she thought she was disturbing the guy.
Mhm.
So the man said to the child, "Look out the window." And he said, "What do you see?" "Oh, I see that over there." And he said, "Yeah." And the child said, "What's that?" He said, "That's a cow." "Okay. And why is it brown?" And he said, "Because that's the color it was born with." Why is it standing? Why is it four legs? And why is it eating grass? We have to think like a child. We got to go back sometimes and think like a child and question everything and never be satisfied with just one simple answer. And actually, in one of our books, we wrote a book called Be Life or Belief. And actually, in the word belief, if you look at the middle words, it spells lie, right?
Mm.
And for me, I remember being at a seminar many years ago, and there's two guys speaking together, and I'm not sure even what they said or which one of them said it, but the penny dropped for me. And the penny that dropped for me was be prepared to question your beliefs often. Question all your beliefs. Because the beliefs that we have are those preconditions or programs that people are holding on to are usually something that's downloaded from somebody else's story. Because as you're growing up as a child, you haven't had that experience yet it becomes your reality as you start going into adulthood. So what has happened is you're downloading somebody else's old story. And you hear people in society say, oh, well, people like us, we don't get opportunities like this. So what happens is they start to download it and they start to store it. And they start to stack up those thoughts. So then what happens is the very moment that something happens that they recognize to be the truth from the stories they've been downloading, it actually becomes their reality. So, and they hold on to that belief. So when I was growing up, I believe it or not, outside of my community, that anybody who was wealthy was the enemy, right? Or anybody with authority was the enemy, because we felt that people were looking down on us because we were known to come from the wrong side of town. Now, when I changed that paradigm and I changed that belief, everything changed. But if I held on to that belief, the chances of me going on, even to have a job, would have been very slim, because I would have taken the attitude that goes with that belief. And even in my life, I would say some of my strongest beliefs were responsible for some of my greatest setbacks,
Yeah.
until I was able to step back and say, hang on, what's going on here? And allow myself to question, Pat, what's really going on here? What do you need to change about that belief?
That's
And I
so
think that's what
powerful.
we need to do. Yeah,
Yeah, that is so powerful. I love that. In the middle of the word belief is the word lie. I've never thought about that. But I think that is so right on. Question everything. And, to your point, mentioning that you had grown up in the poor side of town and a lot of other people resented people who were living on the wealthier side of town. If you don't question those beliefs, you can't ever get closer to those type of people. You can't ever become those type of people, right? And I think a good approach as well is reaching out to people instead of with judgment, reaching out to them with curiosity, right? And asking people, you seem like a really successful person, Pat. How did you do it? Instead of judging and saying he must be greedy. And again, I think there's a lot of underlying beliefs that we have that keep us stuck in a position. And it's part of the reason why I started this podcast. I wanted to reach out with curiosity for people that I believed were successful in their own way, right? And I was curious, how did people do it? I wanted to hear their stories, their background, because at the end of the day, if we don't reach out in curiosity and we only reach out with judgment, we're never going to learn anything. So question, right? Question things, question your beliefs, question other people. How did you do it? And that is just, it's so profoundly life changing when you do that, don't you think?
absolutely. And I mean, and again, Tara, you're telling my story here, right? Because
Yeah.
when I was very young, again, before I was 19, I think, well, it was really around 16 when I started running a company without even knowing that I was running a company. Right? I mean, I got an opportunity to employ other security staff for bars and nightclubs, and my motivation then, by the way, was actually I was hiring my friends from the community I grew up in.
Yeah.
Right, I was able to get work for the guys I played rugby with, the guys who I hung out with, and to be able to find work for them, and then I was getting paid for that purpose, if that makes sense. And before I knew it, I had a business. But when we start looking back and we start thinking about all of the different things that are going on, as we said, those programs and the belief systems that start to come in, you gotta again ask yourself, where did I get this from? I don't own this. I don't own this. It's not mine. So when I realized this, I started thinking, well, what about the people? Somebody gave me a cassette tape, actually, I've got to tell you, and it was Jim Rohn. Somebody said, listen to
Oh,
this,
wow.
right?
Yes.
Listen to this guy. And I said, this guy is just telling my story.
Yes.
And I remember then thinking, I want to reach out, I want to find more. And then I got introduced to Robert Kiyosaki back when I was 20 years old, right? And I listened to what these people were telling me and what these people were saying. And I thought this just made so much sense. At that time, I couldn't explain it, but it made sense. And I started listening to it. So what did I do is I started going out and I started buying their books, right? So the first program that I ever bought was Jim Rohn's program, right? You reap what you sow. And I was actually only sharing this with some of my clients last night. And I thought about this and I understood, if we stay in our field and we keep sowing the seeds, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if somebody else gets some, it doesn't matter what's going on out here. Stay in your field, sow your seeds, keep showing up every single day and doing your best. And then I had reached out to Brian Tracy, then Stephen Covey. So I then started booking programs going to work with these guys. I wanted to know what they had. I wanted to know what they know. Something inside me told me there was something more for me. I still didn't know what it was, but I knew I wanted more. And I knew I could do more and I could make more change. I could do more better in the world. I could make more money. I could make a bigger difference in the people's lives that are around me. I could support guys who were my friends. And I'm grateful to say in the community I grew up in, I employed over 100 guys from there and helped them get mortgages and move out of these estates into better estates. And today their children have better opportunities because of that. Now, that's not to say where I come from was such a bad place, by the way. Yes, it has issues, but I absolutely loved it. I had great people. And I was blessed with the people that I've surrounded with. So I had guys, I joined the Scouts when I was younger. So the mentality was different. I played rugby. My rugby coaches, they were very different. And I joined youth clubs. And these places were very different. They were instilling positive thoughts, positive actions all of the time. So that's what I was downloading. And that's what became my reality. And once I started to see that, that's why I started reaching out to all of these guys. I started doing their programs. I started following their systems. I started applying their systems. And then before I knew it, I have a very large company. And it almost happened with little effort, if that makes sense. No, it was a lot of work, but little effort, you know?
I love that. I love this story, and it so mirrors my own as well. There's somebody who's an influencer, Alex Hormozy. He has a quote that says, "Do so much volume that it's unreasonable to do business with you." I actually think it's do add so much value that it's unreasonable to do business with you. And what you're saying is you are employing people from your neighborhood, you're giving them value, which, trickles down to even the next generation. You're helping your company, you're being that problem solver, right? And
Mhm.
it doesn't feel like work because it was something that you were naturally gifted at. You're naturally gifted, right, at networking. You're naturally gifted at helping connect other people. And sometimes it's something that seems like it's so easy for you that you just get natural joy out of, but other people think of it as work. But that's actually like your natural gift, right?
Yeah, but again, why do we think of it as work, right? It's
Yeah.
because that's what they've been programmed to think. That's because somebody else
Right?
told them. Somebody in their
Wow.
family or somebody in their environment that says, "Oh, I don't like Mondays." Right? The Boomtown Rats wrote a great song about it. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Right? So people think, oh, I don't like Mondays because I got to go to work. Well, the reality is, it doesn't matter. I remember many years ago, and I done some work, by the way, that I didn't enjoy as work.
Right.
But I always remember thinking to myself, you know what? I don't have to be passionate about my work. I just need to be passionate about me. And
Mm.
if I can wake up every day and be passionate about me, it doesn't matter what I do for a living, actually. And I hear a lot of coaches say, if you find what you're passionate about, you never work a day in your life. Well, I'm passionate about me. And I'm passionate about the difference that I get to make and the knowledge that I get to share and the lives that I get to change because I'm prepared to step up and share that. And and I say to people, just become passionate about you and then learn more and do more. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And even if it's not perfect, nobody knows anyway, right? So you got to keep doing what you do.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Such good advice. Be passionate about you. I think so much of our lives, we don't focus on ourselves. It's a focus on other things and you know, everything else out there that's existential, but not within ourselves. And then we come to a certain point in our lives where we question, who am I? It's because we've never done the work to appreciate ourselves. It's self appreciation is a big, huge part to me of building confidence and personal development, stepping into the leader that God designed you to be. And I think when we tap into that, that's when our true potential really gets unveiled. Nobody is going to appreciate you first.
No, believe
Are
it or
they
not.
great? You have
Matter
to
of
learn
fact,
how to.
most people want to beat you up, right?
That's right.
Yeah. But you talk about self appreciation, and I want to share a story because one of my sons, is 28 years old now, and when he was about 8 years old, I was leaving home. He used to read a lot of my books, and he really got into this. And I was leaving one Tuesday evening to go to a coaching program. He said, "Dad, can I share a story with you that you can share tonight at your meeting?" I said, "Yeah." So he shared a story with me about the story. It's called a story giant. But I remember standing there and thinking, wow, my son was 8 years old. And I can tell you, Tara, this was a pivotal moment in my life that changed it an awful lot for me. And I remember sitting in my car in the driveway of my house before I was leaving, just processing what he just shared with me. And I thought to myself, when I started out in business, now let me tell you, when I started out, a lot of people told me you would never make it. A lot of people, right? And a lot of people in my environment thought it was hilarious, the fact that at my young age I was going to start a business. And then people who knew me, who knew where I came from, all those reasons. And it was quite tough. I would tell you, I had no believers on my side in the beginning, but I had to dig deep and find that. And in part of it, it was stubbornness or willpower, or maybe even a little bit of anger that drove me. I kind of said, you know what? I'm going to prove them all wrong. So I set out to prove people wrong. That was my intention. I wanted to prove them wrong. Then I got to a point in my life where, I was doing really well. And I thought, you know what, maybe you can do more. So I set about proving to myself that I could do more. But the night that my son shared what he shared with me, I sat in my car and I said, actually, Pat, I spoke to myself. I said, Pat, you've nothing to prove to anyone anymore, not even yourself. You are absolutely outstanding. And and then I said, and if that doesn't, and then I said, no, it doesn't matter. I'm not looking for approval. It became from self approval to self acceptance, to
Mm.
accept that you're outstanding, accept that you deserve everything that you desire in this world, everything. And that's from that day, and that's my life. That's how I am. My signature on my email, you've probably seen it, is have an outstanding day because I know I will. And people call me on the phone, they go, Pat, how are you? I go, I'm absolutely outstanding, thank you. How are you? And some people go, oh, but those that know me expect that now. Because that's the life I live. That's the way I feel. And that's not being egotistical. I'm not trying to impress anybody. Remember, I'm not trying to prove it to anybody either. I just accept that that is my truth.
Wow. That is so much to unwrap right there. And my husband makes fun of me sometimes. He teases me. I walk around the house, I say out loud, I'm awesome. We're awesome. This is great. What we've built is outstanding. I'm outstanding. You're outstanding. We're the best that's ever been. And I say these things out loud all the time. And at first, maybe when you first start doing this, it might sound, is this real? Is this true? Am I just making this up? Keep saying it again and again and again until you believe it. And it is true based on the value you bring. If you know that you're bringing a ton of value to people and you're changing people's lives, and you hear repeatedly people give you the receipts like you have from Bob Proctor, right? From Brian Tracy, testimonials from top people. Those are your receipts. Not that you need that. You don't need that approval anymore. It's just a receipt that says, yes, this is true. And I encourage everybody out there, this world that we live in, sometimes it can knock down confidence pretty easily if you let it. I encourage you to understand that it starts at home. It starts with you. It starts with your self talk, doesn't it?
100%. And I
Hmm.
think it's really important for people to realize this. Your dominant thought becomes your dominant action, right?
Yeah.
Every single thought that you have is a command to your body to act.
Yes.
So if you think, if you've been feeling frustrated in the past in your life, you've done something that shows up This shows that you're frustrated, right? Or if you felt angry or annoyed, you might slam down the phone or bang the door. Or, you know, you do something, you act out on something. And this is because remember, your brain, by the way, doesn't understand it. It takes on everything. It absorbs everything. So the questions, the doubts that you have, they're not yours, by the way. You don't own them. You've downloaded them somewhere from somebody else's past story. It doesn't belong to you. Your truth is your truth and is what you really believe. So you got to say to yourself, what am I capable of? You're capable of everything, of anything. And something I also get people to understand, if you can ask a question, if you can say to yourself, what would it be like to live a wonderful life on a beautiful home overlooking the ocean with a wonderful family, all healthy, all happy? If you can ask the question, you already know the answer. It's not possible to ask that question without that answer being there. But what has happened is society or whatever, or your past or programming has dampened it down, has pushed it down. It's time to keep asking those questions so we can bring it to the surface. And you will find a way. You start to think strategically, you start to think critically then. And therefore, the more you think strategically, the more critically you think, the more you do that strategic towards your goals, towards your passions. Right. So this is, this is what they say is the great secret, but it isn't the secret because some of the greatest minds have written about this and they consistently write about this. But what's happened is people look for the shortcut instead of following the system, follow the process. The process won't let you down. The system won't let you down. But get involved in the process. Give yourself a chance. And not only that, I mean, this is very important for me, and we just launched a new book last week, and we had a book signing,
Oh,
and
congratulations.
we reached number one. We in multiple categories on Amazon, but also on the Irish Times bestseller list. We're number one in the Irish Times nonfiction um, section, and actually the book is called "When There Is Only Plan Action." Right, so
Ooh,
it's
I
a
love that.
collaboration of stories from 12 different authors, and they tell their story how like we're having this conversation today, that when they started out in life, they started out just to survive, to get to somewhere, and all of a sudden they achieved extraordinary things as a result of showing up every single day. And I keep saying to people, listen, this is very, very, very important. Every single day, compliment somebody, catch somebody doing something right. In
Yeah,
a world that's full of critics right now,
yeah.
catch somebody doing something right and compliment them, bring it to their attention, and then do it for yourself. Catch yourself every day doing something right. And if you do that, it changes the perspective and it changes everything. But not only that, it changes another person's perspective about themselves or the perception of themselves. And that is the switch that can really turn things on for them to say, you know what, I am amazing. I am really good at what I do. And it can change the behavior. So we got to be saying to ourselves, we got to be doing this consistently. And I remember, Tara, in one of my peer groups quite a few years back, I set up a peer group with all this stuff I was learning, right? You have to have a peer group. So I went out looking for a peer group, but I had no idea how I was going to make it work. But we said we're going to do this and we share ideas and so forth. And one of the guys in my peer group, I chose people who were good clients of mine, people who I knew I was doing a lot of business with, who were very successful. And in the room, one of them looked at me. He said, Pat, he said, how did you become so successful? And truthfully, I kind of looked over my shoulder. I thought he was talking to somebody else because I still didn't even see myself as being successful. Yet at that time, I had 65 staff, right? I was employing 65 people and I still didn't see myself as successful. And I kind of went, oh, it just kind of happened. Just kind of happened. And then I thought, I actually was frustrated with myself later. I thought, that's not a good enough answer. It didn't just happen, right?
Right.
So I said, how did it happen? And that was the $1 million question for me, Tara. How how did it happen? So I actually created for me, by the way, and this is something I use, right? So you can see this is my success diary, right? I started journaling. And let me say this to you, of all the people I've ever worked with, I mean, Machen, Brian Tracy, Bob Proctor, our friend Mark Rita Henson, they will tell you, don't trust your memory, think on paper, right? So
Yes.
what I started to do was, what was I doing? How did I get here? And I started writing out all the things that I was doing that got me the results that I got to that point. And I remember sitting there feeling great about myself, right? I was giving myself a pat in the back. I was a great guy. And then the penny dropped and I said, what if? What if I can discover everything that I'm doing that got me here? And if I decide to do it on purpose and do it with purpose, and that is what changed the trajectory of my business. I started planning rather than just doing the things. Because remember, I fail hard, by the way, lots. And I do say to people, if you do fail, by the way, but fail fast and fail forward, right?
Yeah.
But fail fast. And and then I started journaling what got me to the point where I was employing 65 staff. And then I thought, this is what done. This is how I got there. This is how I got this client. This is how I made this happen. And I said, okay, that's what I'm focusing on. And I completely dismissed everything else. I had no interest other than every single day I would plan it out. And I finally listened actually to what I had learned from Stephen Covey and Brian Tracy in particular, was get it in the diary. If it's not in the diary, it doesn't get done. Right. So I started to now structure my days, and I started to plan my days with doing the things that had already got me to where I got to. And within a short period of time, I brought my business to that level where it brought in over 25 million. But I went on to develop more companies. And not only did I build the business, I bought back a lot of my time, right? So because I started to realize where my strengths were, and I stopped trying to improve my weaknesses because it wasn't making that much of a difference. So I focused only on my strengths. And by focusing only on my strengths, it grew tenfold, 30-fold, 40-fold. My business started to grow and the opportunities started to come. So, journal, write down what you're doing. And then only write down what you're doing that's working. And then make a decision to be purposeful with this information. Because that's what's
Yeah.
going to really make the difference.
Yes, I love that. It's so powerful. I started writing down my goals because of I think it was I don't think it was Jim Rohn. It was Brian Tracy. I This was several years ago. I watched a video of him from a speech that he had in the 80s, and he was talking about the importance of writing down your goals because for years they were just kind of in my mind and then they would go and come back. You know how it is. So I started writing down my goals, and the craziest thing happened. They started to actually become true. There's such science to this. Our brains are fascinating mechanisms. When we write down our goals, our reticular activating system in our brain starts to scan our environment to find that goal that you're writing about and find opportunities and find people and think more critically, question things. I wrote down one of my goals. I'm going to be fully booked on speaking engagements this year. I'm telling you what, at day 10 of writing that goal down, I got booked 3 times. I couldn't believe it. And this was something that I hadn't reached out for. They were coming to me. It's really interesting. You start writing it down, they start becoming true. But I also like what you said about writing down the things that are really working and leaning into your strengths. And you know what? As a leader, lean into your strengths as much as you can, hire out your weaknesses. Wherever you're weak, that's a spot for someone else to fill, isn't it?
Absolutely. People often ask me, and I might know a little bit about accounts and and finance, but I say I don't advise. I
Don't
don't
do
even
it.
do my own. I don't even want to know. Don't show me how to do my accounts, right? Don't show me how to do this. I don't want to know, right?
Right.
What am I good at? I often say, look, and if you're in business, right, we understand we have life goals, we've got business goals. But in business, I say there's three things that you're going to need to become successful in business. You're going to need what I call finders, minders, and grinders. You
Mm.
can't be all three. Now, when most people start out in business, they start out as all three. If you stay in that space, then you're going to reach a ceiling. You're never going to get beyond it, right? So you can be two, but you can't be all three. So what are you? Are you the finder, the minder, or the grinder? And you got to identify who those people are in your business if you really want to grow. And you give them the authority to become the finder, the minder, or the grinder. And you allow them permission to make mistakes on that journey, but they do their job. You say, what's their role? What is their responsibility to fulfill being a finder, minder, or a grinder? And then that is all that you do, nothing else. And as a business owner, you should be the finder and the minder. You should not be the grinder anymore. I mean, but we understand at the beginning you're going to have to be all three. but you've got to have a plan. If you don't have a plan to move beyond that, usually people get stuck.
That's right. Wow, so true. You hit a ceiling. What a fantastic conversation. I feel like we could keep talking for hours because just this goal setting alone is so key. And it really does become true. What you tell yourself, the programs that you create, the environment that you're in, what you listen to, what you decide to write in your journal, it all layers to become you in some kind of a capacity, your choices, your outcomes, your decision making. So I encourage everybody to maybe listen to this twice because this is one of those podcast episodes. I think we might not realize that we do have a belief system and what it's preventing us from achieving or blocking us in some kind of a way. But I would really encourage every listener to just question everything, just like what Pat said. What is the narrative you're telling yourself? What is the belief you're prescribing to, and how is it impacting your future trajectory and where you're going in life or your current path? Pat, would you have any last words for our listeners of advice that you could give them to go from where you were in your origin story to the success that you became? How could somebody achieve that? And it's a lot, I
Absolutely.
know.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on
I
that, right?
know.
But
That's right.
if I was to quite simply say to your listeners here, is number one is you show up every day.
Yep.
Now, when I say show up, I don't mean just turn up. Show up with intention and show up with good intention.
Yeah.
And when you show up with good intention, start taking action towards the things that you want. Start thinking and speaking 100% of the time only about the things that you want and dismiss everything else. And then as you're moving forward, you're not going to see proof, right? You're not going to see immediate proof. And you're going to question, oh, is this really working? Let me tell you, if you don't know it's working, it probably is, right? Keep stepping up.
Yeah.
Keep stepping up. Stack them up.
Stack them up. Keep showing up. That is so, so true because we can get discouraged so quickly and then just stop. And I do believe that at any point in time, we're just a few inches away from gold, all of us. But the gold might be tomorrow, and that's okay. Just keep showing up because you never know who's watching. You never know who's paying attention. You never know who's looking at you in admiration. But it starts with your actions today. So take action, everybody. I think that's great advice always. Pat,
It's
thank
all
you so
good.
much. Yes, take action. But to your point, decisive, inspired action, right? With intention.
Absolutely.
I love it. Pat, thank you so much for being a guest on this show. And thank you so much for everyone who tuned into this episode of Grasp Confidence Podcast. Guys, we reached 3,000 5-star reviews on Spotify. We could use a little love on Apple. So go ahead and put in Apple the favorite takeaway from this episode with Pat. What did you learn? Let us know in the comments in Apple, and we will share those comments live on this podcast. We will catch you next time. Take care.